WNST for spring training, and they wet my whistle as I sat around watching a rare afternoon of Mass and Major League Baseball because, well, I needed the nap on Friday afternoon. Luke Jones and I have been lamenting the entire offseason of pitching and what's going to happen with Manny Machado and where is Adam Jones and how could they have not dealt Zach Britton before he got injured. And lo and behold, here it is, spring training, and hey, we're a week into this. Colby Rasmus and Pedro Alvarez. They're off to the races, Lucas.
Yeah, no question. And I think the question that everyone, including myself, keeps asking is that it? Are they doing anything else? And, I mean, at this point, you would think they have the payroll to do that. Even if we're just going to base it off of last year, I'm not even talking about raising the payroll. No, they're about $30 million less than they were last year from a projected opening day payroll. So Lance Lynn, Alex Cobb, we've talked about them. They're still out there. Jake Arrieta's still out there, although I couldn't fathom a reunion with Jake Arrieta. But from a financial standpoint, there should be plenty of money for them to sign one of those guys. I mean, frankly, they could probably sign two of those guys the way this is going and with this free agent market that has picked up, but still plenty of big names that have yet to sign. So I think with every move, I mean, with Andrew Kashner and then Chris Tillman, Colby Rasmus, and then they signed Pedro Alvarez to a minor league deal. I mean, that one to me is much more inconsequential than the others, based on the fact that Pedro Alvarez barely played for the Orioles last year, and he was in their system playing at Norfolk all year. But you look at the other three, and you can say, okay, well, yes, those are two starting pitchers, and yes, that's an left-handed hitting outfielder, but is that it? Is that the best you can do? Are you going to do anything else in addition to that? And no, I'm not so convinced as far as that they're going to bring in another outfielder, but I think we've said it all along from the time that they signed Kashner. I've said, look, if Andrew Kashner is in the back end of your rotation, I'm okay with that. I mean, I don't think the guy's terrible. He's a legitimate major league starting pitcher, but if you're a team that fancies itself on the idea of trying to be competitive and contending for a wild card spot, Andrew Kashner being your number 3 starter or your number 2 starter, that's not going to hack it. That's not even coming close. If he's your number 4 starter, okay, that's a little bit more palatable. I think ideally he's your number 5 starter, but I'm not going to get crazy and expect him to sign 2 more starting pitchers. But, with Chris Tillman, I'm okay with Chris Tillman as a $3 million flyer as your number 5 starter, but I don't like the idea whatsoever of just handing him the number 4 starter job, and that's that. A guy who had an ERA approaching 8, that's crazy talk to me. I don't care how good his track record is or how confident you are that he's healthy.
ERA approaching 8. I just want to interject that one more time because, I can't get over it. I mean, I look, you and I had these conversations last August when the Masson employees, which is pretty much all that's left in the locker room, there's you and there's them at this point, in a Sun Paper reporter running around, that everybody's talking about the Orioles re-signing Tillman in August and September last year. And I looked up and I'm like, he shouldn't even be in the rotation now. And you're going to project him out next year? And talk about him being healthy or talking about guaranteed money. Look, I know you urinated on the $3 million last week. I will never do that, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Chris Tillman will make 24 starts and pitch to a 4.6 ERA or something. I don't know that that's great either. Like, when the top side is maybe his ERA will be around 5, which is what you're going to say about Kashner probably as well. Although I know, Texas was kind to him in the ERA department last year. But I look at all these guys as ceiling is a 5 ERA. I don't know that this team's going to hit the ball like that, like the way they did 2-3 years ago.
Well, you need to be careful how you're using ceiling. Ceiling's not 5 ERA. Ceiling is Chris Tillman's. He's had seasons where he's had a 3.5 ERA. The big question with him is if he's healthy. Now, he says he's thrown the entire spring. He was working out in Sarasota. So clearly the Orioles, you would think, had a little more intel on him than other prospective suitors for his services. It's $3 million. Again, we need to stop thinking about $3 million like we did 15 years ago. This is the equivalent of giving a pitcher, I mean, not the vet minimum because it's not actually the veteran minimum, but this is the equivalent of giving a starting pitcher $1 million 10 years ago. I mean, it's a flyer. I'm fine with it if he's competing for the final spot in your rotation. I don't like it if he's just penciled in and you say, well, everything's going to be fine. He's healthy, and he's going to be our number 4 starter, and he was really good from 2012 through 2016. And the thing is, last year happened. He had an ERA of 7.84. Again, and frankly, that's why you can get him for $3 million. You know, if he had an ERA of 3.8, which was a little more typical of Chris Tillman in the previous 5 years, I guess 2015 aside, but the other 4 seasons pitched, an ERA well below 4. But that's why he's available for $3 million. So again, I don't mind it as a buy low investment.
My question is, was somebody else going to give him 2.9? Is there any other team in Major League Baseball that would bring him in, give him $3 million, and say to their fan base, here's a guy whose ERA was 8 last year in the big leagues, and we're going to bring him in, give him real money, and stick him in the back of the rotation every 5th day. That doesn't exist. Like that's the part that boggles my mind is who were you bidding against? Seriously. That's what I would ask. Well, what if they got somebody else in the Padres who had an 8 ERA and gave him $3 million? We'd say they're out of their minds.
Understood. Again, you're acting like $3 million is $15 million, Ness. I mean, this is not a big investment.
It's an investment in a guy who wasn't last year. Not never was, but wasn't last year.
Ness, look, the Orioles have issues. That's obvious. I'm not going to disagree with you on that. But do you really think they're signing Chris Tillman thinking he's going to have a 7.8 ERA again? They're not. I'll say this. I sure as hell would much rather put $3 million into the hopes of a Chris Tillman rebound rather than giving another Wade Miley $12 million a year. I mean, seriously.
Fair enough.
I'm being totally honest there. I mean,
okay.
That's what it comes down to. We talk about this all the time. We've seen them do this. They did it with Ubaldo Jimenez. They did it with Bonnie Gallardo. They did it with Wade Miley last year. Even though they didn't sign him, they traded for him, and he had another year another year where they had him under contract. But my point is, I'm fine with it being a bounce back. And to answer your question, there were other teams interested in him. Now, the question was, were they going to give him a major league deal? But sometimes that ends up being semantics. The Orioles signed Colby Rasmus to a minor league deal. I don't think anyone expects him not to make the major league roster unless he's just so incredibly terrible or decides he doesn't want to play baseball again, like he was kind of talking about, or like he did talk about midway through last season. So, as far as the whole $3 million thing, was another team going to guarantee him a $3 million major league contract? No. But at the same time, again, I think it's fine. It's a fine flyer to take. I'm not trying to say I love the deal. I'm saying the deal's fine if you're augmenting that, if you're making that, you're improving the context by going out and signing Lance Lynn or Alex Cobb. If Chris Tillman's your number 4 starter and he's penciled into the rotation and doesn't have to even, quote, make the team, then yeah, I take much more exception with that. But the $3 million thing, I mean, we need to stop looking at $3 million like that's consequential money. I mean, Ryan Flaherty made, what, 1 point, I can't remember, it was just shy of $2 million last year. I mean, that's $3 million is utility infielder money for a lot of teams these days. So that's not to say that I have high expectations for Chris Tillman, but again, we're talking about a minimal amount of money. I'm fine with it if he's not guaranteed to be in your starting rotation, if he has to actually earn it. I think it's, there's enough of a track record there, and it's not so long ago that it's impossible for him to bounce back. But that said, to say that you needed to address your starting, not to say that you needed to, they needed to address their starting rotation, being the worst starter ERA in the majors this past year. And if one of your answers is to re-sign one of those guys and he's not even going to be competing for a starting job at this point, I have a problem with that big time. So, again, if you improve the context of this deal, I'm fine with it. I don't like it if you're trying to sell me on that being a solution to their problem, because Chris Tillman has to prove ultimately that he's healthy and that he is the same pitcher that he was a couple years ago. And if he does, then that $3 million is a great investment. If he doesn't, then you hope that they're not in a position, and they shouldn't be with a $3 million commitment, that if Chris Tillman has an ERA after 6 starts of 7.5, then at that point you might just say, you know what, it's time to move on. This is a sunk cost. He's just like he was last year. It's unfortunate, and then you move on. $3 million shouldn't be a deterrent to do that, as we've seen them do with Bud Norris a couple years ago, he was making much more money than that. So, again, I'm not going to continue to just squawk about this deal. My problem is need to be doing something better than this in addition to doing this if you really want to put yourself in a position to try to move the meter a little bit more and make your starting rotation at least mediocre to the point that being competitive isn't such a far-fetched notion.
The Orioles will move between Port Charlotte and Sarasota for much of the week in spring training action, much of it blind to all of us who follow the Orioles because, let's be honest, the guy who owns the team is a maniac. And, hey, at least they're buying the bats here, Luca. Kobe Rasmus and Pedro Alvarez. If this were 2011, man, that'd be a hell of an off-season get, wouldn't
it? Yeah, I guess. I mean, Kobe Rasmus, it's somewhat interesting, I suppose. I mean, he's another strikeout, power hitter, possession have a great on-base percentage in his career, does hit some home runs. There's no doubt about that. Even last year, not being 100%, and before he even walked away from the Rays, he had 9 home runs and 121 at-bats. He has some pop. Even though he's older now, so you kind of wonder how it translates, but he has been a pretty good defensive outfielder in his career. And that's something that's something that's been an ongoing need for them, quite frankly, for a few years now. So, I mean, I'm okay with it, I guess. Again, I'd certainly like to aim to do better. I'd still really like to see Austin Hayes get an extended look and give him a real chance to try to win a job in the way Trey Mancini did last year in the Grapefruit League. But with Rasmus, you're going to get some power. You're going to get a lot of strikeouts. You're not going to get a whole lot in terms of on-base percentage. You hope that he's still a plus defender. Is someone who has been able to play some center field in his career, so that gives them someone that can spell Adam Jones.
Well, they are making it a competition now, right? I mean, there are warm bodies there that are going to make it that much harder for the Austin Hayeses or whomever that next person that would step up, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, Kobe Rasmus is definitely in that equation. I'm not convinced that Pedro Alvarez has much of a chance to make this team barring an injury. I mean, they've already said that they've kind of given up on the outfield experiment that did not go well last year. Some of the things I heard about him playing in the outfield, about the biggest compliment I heard was he tries hard out there. That's kind of the end of the Pedro Alvarez outfield experiment.
Well, nobody ever really wanted him to have a glove ever, right? Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as much as he was, number 1 pick and all that, and second overall back in 2008, he was never someone who blossomed to the point of being a defender that you're okay with out there. I mean, he's clearly a guy that's about his bat, and we saw this last year. I mean, the Orioles had Pedro Alvarez at AAA Norfolk all year, and he only got got called up in September and had 32 at bats, 34 plate appearances. So I'd be really surprised if he's in any kind of serious conversation. If he is, that to me means Mark Trumbo or Chris Davis or both of them have gotten hurt because let's face it. I mean, the Orioles have plenty of things they need. The one thing they really don't need is those DH first base types.
But they've always loved them, right? I mean, 20 years going back, we've always had 3 or 4 of those guys, right?
Well, and there's I mean, that's kind of a cyclical thing. I mean, there have been times where that's kind of one of the big things around baseball. Right now, that's teams have kind of gone away from that a little bit. Power is one-dimensional power. Let me rephrase that. One-dimensional power is not as valued as it was even 5 years ago. So kind of makes that Chris Davis deal look even worse. So, but it's really I think Pedro Alvarez. This is much more a AAA depth kind of move. And look, if he's content playing at Norfolk, and I'm sure they'll probably give him an opt-out, and if he wants to go that route, I have no problem with that. I mean, it's not like he's going to be blocking anyone per se. So, but it's very clear these first base DH types. I mean, my goodness, Trey Mancini moved to the outfield because the Orioles have too many first base DH types. So I don't think Pedro Alvarez is going to be a factor. I'd be really surprised if he is. And if he is, like I said, it means someone is hurt or a couple players are banged up.
Luke Jones joining us here. It is all brought to you by our friends at Freedmont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need the right lender. Go to Freedmont.com and learn about all that they do, buying, selling, or just trying to get some information about the value of your house and what your options are. You need Freedmont Mortgage. Also brought to you by our friends at King Discount Liquors. Lottery, beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. You need to get to Rosedale and give the King a ring. When I get back from Indianapolis, it's going to be one of my first stops over there as well. Luke, for me with the Manny Machado thing, it feels a little Kardashian, doesn't it? I mean, and I know every city he goes into, the Bostons, the New Yorks, I'm sure the Phillies media will stalk him around, and even National League teams, whenever he's places, they're going to be asking about, what do you think of this place? What do you think of that place? Mr. Miami, all that stuff. This is part of the circus coming to town here this summer, right?
Yeah, there's no question. And Bryce Harper and the Nationals are going to be dealing with a very similar kind of conversation.
But at least they're going to be winning. I'll say that much.
Sure. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But, with the Orioles, I mean, with Machado, shortstop, how does he handle those responsibilities? I know a couple years ago when he played there extensively, when Hardy was out, Manny, there were some struggles there, not from a standpoint of anything that you saw per se, because he's a good fielder, certainly has the arm to play shortstop, but just the responsibilities that a shortstop has, being the captain of the infield, understanding, making calls to your teammates in the infield as far as what plays on for a bunt or, what shift are they in, all those different things. How's he going to handle that? I'm not saying he can handle it, but it's going to be interesting. How does he handle that? And let's also keep in mind, this is a guy coming off of an off year, for considering where he normally is. I mean, he hit 259. He had an OPS under 800, struck out 115 times. The walk rate, which had really spiked up 2015, has come down a little bit the last couple of years. Now, it did rebound a little bit this year from the previous, but this is a player who he needs to go out there and show that he's a legitimate. And when I say legitimate, it's relative. I don't know if anyone's a legitimate $350 million player, but he needs to show that he's in that territory. If he has another season where he hits 260 and is only a 3.5 WAR player as opposed to a 6 or 7 WAR player, then not that he's not going to get lucrative money. He's still going to get a huge 9-figure contract, but is he in the conversation with getting a deal as good as Bryce Harper then? I'm not so sure. So,
well, you can shoot some holes in him as a teammate, as a guy who's had problems staying on the field, being a hothead, being not very communicative at various points. And now this whole move from third base to shortstop, I don't know. If I'm the guy waving $300 million around, I'm watching closely. This is a big year for him, to say the least. But he's got some demons and some things, and not to mention his knees, which I'm sure Mr. Angelos, if he were, let's say, a St. Louis Cardinal hitting the market, that's what the Orioles would say about him. From the outside looking in, they talk about his health. They talk about his demeanor. They talk about that horrific slump last year that he was in. But then they would talk about his ceiling, right? And there's no shaking that. But him as a shortstop at 25 right now, we're going to learn about that part of him, that's for sure. And the Orioles are giving him enough room to either, go get himself $400 million or play his way down to an 8-year, $200 million deal that they could afford or something, right?
Yeah, and again, what my thought, so many people took exception to the idea of Machado moving to shortstop. Well, Tim Beckham's not a Gold Glove shortstop. I think that's pretty clear watching him last year. I think at best he's fine there. I think at best he's average at shortstop. So I don't have a big problem with Machado moving to shortstop. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, though, because to what you just said, keep in mind, Manny Machado will be 26 in July. You're talking about an individual who's 6'3". I don't know what his listed weight is now, but he's clearly bigger than he was as a 20-year-old. as we all are, basically, right? I mean, it's kind of just the way it works, and certainly with professional athletes, as their bodies mature a little bit more, they get a little bigger and stronger. Certainly being 6'3", it made sense. But if you remember, go back to 2010 when he was drafted, even then, there were questions as far as, and at that point, Manny Machado was a shortstop. But there were questions of, would he be a shortstop long-term, or as he got a little bit older and a little bit bigger, would he ultimately move to third base? So I think this is a really interesting opportunity for him. I don't know how much it really impacts the Orioles, but it's a really fascinating opportunity for him to show that he can go out there and not just play shortstop. I think everyone assumes he can play shortstop. You're not a platinum glove winning third baseman and not able to play shortstop whatsoever when you were raised as a shortstop, when you came up as a shortstop. But the question is he just an okay shortstop? Is he just slightly above average? Is he clearly above average? Or is he a Gold Glove caliber shortstop too? And that's what we're going to find out. We haven't seen him long enough at that position at the major league level to make that determination. So I think if he's the Orioles, I don't think it hurts his value that he's playing shortstop. I think it can only help it from a standpoint of if he goes out there and plays shortstop really, really well, then any team out there that maybe isn't looking for a third baseman but is looking for a shortstop at the trade deadline, well, Machado becomes that much more attractive because you're not just going to get a really, really good bat for that position, but you're going to get a guy who's going to play above average defense there too, which is a little bit of an unknown. Not a big one, but we don't know just how good he can be at shortstop. So, from that standpoint, I don't see any major downside to the Orioles putting him at shortstop. I'm not sure there's a ton of upside to it either, but here we are, and Tim Beckham's going to play third base, and if you find out Tim Beckham can play third, that makes him a little more valuable moving forward. So you try to figure it out, and ultimately, you're hoping Manny Machado has a big year. Whatever that means, I'm hoping for the benefit of the franchise and the big picture, it means that it makes them more attractive to deal them at the trade deadline. At the same time, if you're looking for scenarios where the Orioles are in the wild card race, and look, there have been other off seasons we've been sitting here and talking about them and writing them off, and then before you know it, they're right there in the wild card race, the playoff race. So I'm not going to say it's impossible. I think it's very much unlikely, but if they have guys bounce back, if they go out and sign another pitcher, that guys that are still out there, we'll see. And if Manny Machado has an MVP caliber year, then this team's probably sitting right there in the thick of the wild card race at the very least. And then that really, that would make you think that it would decrease the chances of them dealing him. And then that's a whole nother discussion. So this is just, there's so many layers to this beyond the talk about extending him. I think that it's clear that ship has sailed. But even with trading him, what he does, what he brings to the team, what he can bring in a trade at the trade deadline or sometime before then, are the Orioles kind of sort of hanging around in contention in the way they were mathematically last year or 2015, where you don't really think they have a chance, but mathematically they still have a chance? I mean, it's just, there's a lot to this, and I think if you're an Orioles fan, yeah, you kind of want to see Manny Machado play this year, I suppose. You'd love to see him stay here long term, but I think anyone who's realistic knows that's not happening. So then what are you going to do to use this asset that you're no longer going to have in 8 months? What are you going to do to try to flip this asset into something that can help you moving forward? And that's something they obviously explored in the off season. They didn't like the deals they saw. Were their demands way too high, or were they being lowballed, or was it some of both? But anyway,
well, there wasn't a whole lot of open bidding. It's not like they had 3 good bids or, something that it felt like they were even close on pulling the trigger. They played some games, right? But nobody was willing to, go all the way to their, Moncada. I mean, pick whatever that sexy prospect would be.
Sure.
Machado wasn't bringing that in the offseason. Unless somebody turns an ankle at shortstop or third base, which is what you're sort of betting on. You're betting on a major injury somewhere for the Dodgers or the Yankees or somebody that would have a major need to say, I want to win right now, right?
Yeah, but I think it goes. I think it goes a little beyond. I mean, certainly, if that happens, that only improves their chances of getting a good deal. I don't think you're going to get a great deal for Manny Machado at this point. I think you can still get a good deal for him, but the stars have to align, and maybe it is a shortstop or a third baseman getting hurt for one team, and then it's another team that just has an average player at one of those positions, and then they're trying to jump in to prevent that first team from getting Machado, and that's how you start off a bidding war. I mean, you have to draw up demand however it happens, whether it's from injury, whether it's because a team's just trying to get better at that spot and they just have an average player there or slightly above average. I mean, Machado's a special talent, and he's the kind of guy that we talk all the time at the trade deadline as far as guys that move the meter, and we've talked about how the Orioles have gotten some players at the deadline in recent years who did not move the meter, like Gerardo Parra or Wade Miley. But, in the case of Manny Machado, I don't care who the team is. He's a guy that's moving the meter, and he's moving the meter in a major way, even for a 2-month rental. So, from that standpoint, again, it goes back to what I said. You want Machado playing at an MVP caliber level, even if this team is not very good, and that just is going to drive up the demand. And then if you throw in a factor like a shortstop or a third baseman on a contender getting hurt, it's just going to make him look that much more attractive. And then you have other teams trying to play defense, and that's how you draw it up. Again, we'll see how it plays out. I know at FanFest when they were asked about it, they cited the Jason Hayward deal. Now, there have been players that were rentals that ended up fetching really nice returns for teams, whether it was the off season or even just the trade deadline. But it does make it more challenging. Why we've talked about this going back to last year, that they should have been, at least at that point, starting to explore the possibility of trading Machado. They didn't do that. So they didn't really find anything to their liking this winter. You didn't get the sense that any teams truly put a special offer on the table and they turned their nose up to it, because I think word would have trickled out by now about that happening. But you have to hope. And again, I'm not sure how high percentage it is, but you have to hope that at some point here, whether it's May, whether it's June, and the Orioles are already 12 games under 500 and trending in a really bad direction, you hope some team knocks their socks off and makes an offer, and they come away with a couple good pieces that can help them for the future. Again, I'll reiterate what I've said to you a few times. The absolute worst thing that I fear for this team and this fan base is that Buck Showalter works his magic again just enough that they're decent. Certainly not a team that you think is capable of winning the World Series, but they're in the hunt, and we know the second wild card allows for a lot of teams to still be in the hunt in late July. That's where I'm worried about the territory they're going to be in, and then if they foolishly say, well, we're going to go for it, and don't make a big trade or do anything like that. They add this year's Wade Miley or this year's Gerardo Parra, and then Manny Machado ends up walking for nothing but a draft pick. That's the scenario that I really fear for this team more than anything else. I mean, if you're going to go for it, then go for it. Which I don't at all.
They're going for it. They signed Chris Tillman. What do you want?
Right. That's my thing. I mean, you can't go for it and then sign a bunch of guys that at best are going to be useful spare parts. That's at best. At best, Chris Tillman can be a decent back half of the rotation guy. At best, Andrew Kashner, same thing for him. At best, you get some other guys to bounce back. But again, what does that all add up to? Best case scenario, 83 wins, 84 wins. I don't know. I mean, a lot has to go well, I feel, for that to even happen. So if you're in that territory, that's the territory I fear them being in. So I guess in some crazy way, you could almost say if you're a fan that's worried about the big picture, in some ways you might want this team to struggle. You might not want this team to win some games from a standpoint of if you're afraid that means they're not going to trade Manny Machado at the deadline. And then he's going to walk away and they're going to get next to nothing in return.
Oh, well, that could certainly be the case. All of Luke's reports brought to you by our friends at Brooks Huff Tire and Auto Center. That is Luke's Garage up in Shrewsbury. It can be your automotive helper anywhere along the I-83 corridor, whether you're in Towson, Timonium, Hunt Valley. Brooks Huff is there all the way up to York, Pennsylvania. Anything under the hood of your car, featuring Goodyear products and the best service anywhere. Find them on the web or just find them on York Road or somewhere near York Road at Brooks Huff Tire and Auto Center. Also, all of our WNST programming, we will be in Indianapolis all week. Brought to you by Howard Bank, a relentless commitment to be the best at everything they do. Branches throughout Baltimore and Maryland. A unique, hands-on approach to banking. I got my my Howard Bank mug here. I'm going to have a sip of my beverage. It's like Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. The tasty Kona Blend coffee that I love and serve, as well as the best fried chicken and Western fries. Make sure you're downloading the Rofo app and using that when you pump your gas. It's going to wind up saving you money. It's going to wind up getting you some free fried chicken down the line. Real fresh, real fast. It is Rofo and Royal Farms. Download their app. Last but never least, the Maryland Jockey Club partnering with us all year long. Cure the Winter Blues this weekend at Laurel. There's racing every weekend. And, of course, the entries will be at the front of WNST.net on the left-hand side, as well as in our WNST morning newspaper. That, of course, all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month if you want to get a little inspiration. Get out to Planet of Triumphs. Don't forget to buy a Toyota.com audio vault there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world to download. Listen when you want, where you want, how you want. We're going to be in Indianapolis. And last but never least, Luke, I'm not going to let you go from this baseball segment here without saving the best for last. And that, of course, is the fact that nasty Nestor Cortez has made his debut. The left-handed fireballer and Rule 5er. You know, he was a Yankee at one point, Luke. That means he might have been good at one point. So what do you think, man? Nestor Cortez for number 5 in the rotation. I'm sticking with that all spring long. It's giving me a reason to watch.
I just think it's funny you said fireballer because this guy's the opposite of that.
I know. It's great, isn't it?
He's a finesse guy. And they were even talking. He had an outing over the weekend. I think, gave up one run, but he actually looked pretty good. And the comparison that people give, and no one thinks he's going to be this good, obviously, but people kind of compare his style to a Jamie Moyer kind of guy, just that crafty lefty, right?
Give me that Jeff Ballard. Give me that Cuellar. Give me that crafty lefty is what I need. Hey,
I mean, if you're going to tell me that Nestor Cortez ends up being a major league pitcher, I'm not going to be shocked by that. I mean, there have been Rule 5 guys that do that. I don't like the idea of a Rule 5 guy being penciled into the rotation, and not that he is, because Miguel Castro's in that discussion. I mean, Mike Wright's out of options, so he's kind of by default in that discussion. Gabe Unoa, by default, is in that discussion. But you hope that, my goodness, all of the time, all the sweat equity that the Orioles have invested in these Rule 5 picks, and I've talked about this a lot, I'm fine with the idea of taking a Rule 5 guy in December. I have no issue with that. I have no issue with taking a long look at them in spring training. But what has killed me has been the number of times that they have left themselves shorthanded, the number of times they've been in roster crunches, and they've gotten so little return. I mean, Ryan Flaherty is the success story, and he was a utility player. And look, Ryan Flaherty's a fine ball player as far as being a utility guy. He brings a little bit of value, and I stress a little bit because I think there are guys out there in free agency every single offseason that can do that kind of stuff. But you'd hope one of these times, and maybe with this, most likely, I think a lot of us think this is going to be Dan Duquette's swan song. Maybe his final Rule 5 pick or his final Rule 5 draft, Nestor Cortez blossoms into a guy that ends up being a 12-game winner.
We can only hope he's Johan Santana. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, but this year, as far as him, whether it's the fifth starter role, whether it's that long man in the bullpen, T.J. McFarland was their long man in 2013. He was okay in that role. I think it makes it a little easier, perhaps, if it's someone that can kind of be a swing man. But at the same time, if you go through the period of time where you have 4 or 5 really crummy starts in a row, which Lord knows the Orioles had that countless times last year, makes it much tougher to get that Norfolk shuttle fired up if you have a Rule 5 guy as your either number 5 starter or long man in the bullpen. So we'll see. I mean, he's going to have to perform, and the early returns are. I'll say this much: there's some intrigue down in Sarasota with how he looks. I don't know if I'd say excitement just yet.
Intrigue. They can only get so excited about a guy named Nestor down in Sarasota. I'm surprised they let the SOB in the joint. But, hey, we got 4 more weeks of fun. You and I will be having fun out in Indianapolis doing all things Combine this week. Hold on to your hat. We got an NFL draft coming up. You can find Luke at WNST.net, and Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. And, of course, all of his reports brought to you by our friends at Brooks Huff Tire and Auto Center. I want to remind everybody, the Ray Lewis trip on sale. We're now on to our 4th bus. We are doing a baseball game in Cleveland, a baseball game in Pittsburgh for all baseball fans, as well as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. So it's going to be a big, big weekend. You can learn about all of our trips, all 3 options, A, B, and C. One of the trips actually leaves on Thursday, where you can go and see the Bears and the Ravens play completely meaningless, the always important first of 5 preseason football games again. But we will have a bus for that, and everyone will be touring the Pro Football Hall of Fame on Friday, so it'll be good stuff out there as well. If there's any breaking news at all, you're going to get it first on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Kalatzos will be here from 3 until 5 on Thursday. Luke and I will be checking in from the Combine in Indiana. Man, we got no Hoosiers. We got no Mackey. All we got is a Big Ten tournament in New York. And we're out in the friendly heart of the Midwest. So it'll be good times and lots of football information you'll be hearing later on in the week here at WNST. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. We will be streaming live from Indianapolis on our Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.